Okay, we're now recording. A glance at last week's, part of a quick review. We discussed the Norman invasion. The year was 1066, a year which everybody in England, Scotland knows. William the Conqueror and the Normans invaded across the English Channel. And what was important from our viewpoint is the Normans brought a new language to England, the French, or I like to call it the French-Latin. So that became the language of the conquerors. And the story of the, as you saw last time, the story of the Norman invasion from the coast of France, coast of Brittany, across the English Channel. The story was told in great detail by the extraordinary embroidery work of the women of the court, the famous Bayeux tapestry. The Bayeux tapestry tells the whole story of the invasion by the Normans in great detail, in 230 feet of detail. And Dottie Wilson wrote a very interesting personal connection she has with the Bayeux tapestry, but I'm going to do a little bit of background first. We have a few pictures to fill in the background. No.
Which one?
The other three.
Okay. The other three?
The other three.
Okay.
Keep going. Yeah, this is it. Okay, I'll go back to that one.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, this is one of the many segments of the 230 feet of pictorial description. What's happening here, as I mentioned, that William the Conqueror gathered his army right on the beach, the English Channel. And here, right in the middle of this picture, well, in the left, you see axemen cutting down trees. They cut down a whole forest of trees, cut them into timbers to build their ships for the invasion. And here you see this man has cut the planks and he's planing. Apparently it's a plane squaring off the planks. And then to the right, you see the two men in the lower boat with their finishing axes, or finishing. So they cut down a forest, built an entire fleet. Let's go to the next picture. Now in this fleet, in this picture, you have the fleet on the left. They're crossing, they have crossed the English Channel. They've landed in southern England. And take a look at the just left of center. You see the two horses. They've been offloaded. And look at the far left. You see that boat on the far left has two horses. Their heads are sticking up. And if you've ever tried transporting a horse in an open boat, no easy task. I really have puzzled all my life about how could they keep the horses reined in. But it was fairly smooth sailing, so they were fortunate. And right in the middle, you have the emptied boats. And to the right, you have the Norman soldiers, William the Conqueror's soldiers, mounted up on their horses. And they're, by the way, look at the mail armor they're wearing. All those little circles it's the earliest form of armor. They're riding off to the right to the Battle of Hastings. Now, the next picture is the peak at the battle. And this is a wild and furious scene. And the battle was actually pretty even. The Normans were on horseback, and William, for some reason, decided he was confident enough that they charged uphill. The Harold and his army, the original Saxons, the Germanic Saxons, were at the top of the hill. It was not too steep a grade, but they had the advantage of shooting and attacking downhill. But they were foot soldiers. They were on foot. The Normans were principally cavalry on horseback. So you see this wild scene of, and in another scene, there are several horses that are dead. Here you have dead bodies all across the bottom. So this is oh, by the way, and look at the script written across the top. You have this script that goes on for 230 feet, telling verbally the details of the story. So we know a huge amount about the entire Norman invasion. From this is a historical document that is extremely unusual and rare. Let's see, let's go to the next one.
You need me back to Dottie's because the
Yeah, the two pictures.
Okay. There we go.
There. Now, Dottie Wilson, after we had talked about the Bayeux Tapestry, Dottie Wilson sent a very interesting message that she had a personal connection with the Bayeux Tapestry. So I'm going to, by the way, these two frames are in Dottie Wilson's house, framed on the wall. And I've asked Diana to read this letter. It explains Dottie's connection.
Okay, this is from Dottie. In 1980, my family and I were on a camping trip. Hold on. Okay. Okay, in 1980.
You're sure your face?
Yes. In 1980, my family and I were on a camping trip in France when we visited Rouen. I read in the Michelin Green Guide about the Bayeux Tapestry, so we visited there. There it was displayed in its full length, spread along the wall in a room the size of Liberty Bell High School gymnasium. I was so impressed with it, I bought a kit to embroider my own section of it. In the 1980s, I ordered a second kit, a different part of a story. These two panels are 22 inches by 4 feet. This past Christmas, my son Mike gave me 2 more small pieces. The kits contain linen with the outlines of the part of the panel, along with yarns in rust, forest green, light green, yellow, and navy blue. As seen in any photo, the parts that are fully sewn use what is known as the Bayeux stitch. A back stitch is used for the outlines. Next, one sews long horizontal strands about 1.5 inches long to fill in the space. Then back over this with vertical strands every 1/8 of an inch or so, and then again, a tacking stitch across the vertical ones. Let me go back to Dottie's pictures here.
I read that last section about the stitch.
Okay,
There.
so, and I'm good. There's one of them, and I'm gonna enlarge it a little bit. So this is Dottie's incredible stitching here. So, you want me to read that, how you do the stitch? A back stitch is used for the outlines. Next, one sews long horizontal strands about 1.5 inches long to fill in the space. Then back over this with vertical strands every 1/8 of an inch or so. And then again, a tacking stitch across the vertical ones. I have several books about the tapestry, which is really an embroidery, not a tapestry, but the French say no tourists would come if it were called an embroidery. So this, so this is Dottie's.
Yes, I could go to Dottie.
No, I can't.
Now, just a couple of details about this particular scene. This is the scene, as it says, if you read Latin at the top, it says hic Harold mare navigat. Here, Harold is the Okay, this is part of the backstory. There's a long backstory, which I'm going to condense tremendously. But Harold was sent on a very important diplomatic mission by by King Edward. The King of England was Edward, a Saxon, the Anglo-Saxon. And he wanted to send one of his most trusted diplomats, namely his brother-in-law, King Edward of England had no offspring. So, and he knew this was near the end of his life. He knew that he would be dying. And so what he did, he chose his brother-in-law to go with a small fleet of ships across the North Sea and go to William. He was not the William the Conqueror yet. He was William the Duke of Normandy, and give him this important message that King Edward had selected, because he had no offspring, he had selected William of Normandy to be his successor as King of England. Very important moment of history. So a Frenchman would be coming over to become the king. Well, so here is Harold going on board with, notice this on the left, the party is coming down the steps. This is in England. And notice the fourth person in from the left is carrying his dog, probably a valuable hunting dog. The person in front of him, that could be Harold himself, is carrying a falcon. Falconry was the sport of kings and dukes, nobility. Another detail, take a look at the oars in the boat. The oars seem to be bent about 2 or 3 feet from the tip, all 4 of those oars. I wondered what that was about. And I'm guessing this, that when you put an oar in the water, if you're standing there looking at an oar in the water, it goes down from the water line, it looks like it's bent because of the distortion. And it's an optical distortion. Anyway, there are numerous interesting details like this. Let's go to the next sketch.
This is Dottie's also.
Yeah, this is also the one that Dottie, this is amazing. Put yourself in Dottie's place. She was, I'm sure that you identified with those women of the court. They were just the royalty of the Normans. Now this picture, the person sitting on the throne is King Edward, near the end of his life. And Dottie tells me that what he's carrying in his left hand, it looks like a scepter, the symbol of authority, but actually it's not, it's a walking stick. He was in his last, this was within the last 2 years of his life, when he trusted his brother-in-law. By the way, that turned out to, the brother-in-law did meet with William in Normandy, but when Edward did die, in fact, this is the moment where he dies, and then his body is taken into this church on the right. That church is the original, which still stands there in Westminster. It's the Westminster Abbey, where kings and queens of England are buried. And this building, look at the style, the architectural style. This is not Gothic. The Gothic had another, let's see, 10, 11, another 100 years before the Gothic style, 80 years, before the Gothic style came into existence in northern France. So this is the earlier first style of stone churches in Western Europe. It's called the Romanesque style. Now look what's happening. Right in the middle of the picture, there's a man up at this tower, up on a rooftop. What is he carrying in his left hand, sticking way up in the air? It's a weathercock. It's a metal rooster, the weather vane, that he will be placing on the very highest point of Westminster Abbey, which you can see today still. And a couple of weeks after this moment, after the death of King Edward, the church, Westminster Abbey, was finally consecrated officially, so it was completed. So many fascinating details here. So now let's go back. And I want to see if Dottie has anything to add. So it's back to face. Let's see, where's Dottie on here? Right here. Is it possible to enlarge, Dottie?
No.
Okay, Dottie, you need to unmute your voice, please.
Okay, I'm here.
Do you have any
Okay,
thoughts
so-
to add?
Yes, I want to add something that ties it in even more to our class. And that is, first of all, the tapestry illustrates many Nordic influences. The ships, the clothing, and the creatures are very Nordic. In June 4th, 1941, Heinrich Himmler established a research group that included experts in German history, traditional German costume, and a photographer, and a painter. Their mission was the study of and photograph and determine the meaning of the tapestry for the Third Reich. Himmler believed he would find the origins of the German state in Normandy. A documentary film was presented at an arts festival in Kiel, and a paper entitled, quote, "The Conquest of England by the Normans," unquote, was read in 1943. Why didn't Hitler steal the Bath tapestry in 1941? Perhaps he wished to leave this artifact of Nordic culture on French soil, establishing a Teutonic presence there before the creation of nation states.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. Hitler's addition to the a recent update. That's fascinating. One other thing I failed to mention, when King Edward died, and before his coffin was carried into the Westminster Abbey, Harold, his brother-in-law, became a traitor. That is to say, Harold had told William of Normandy, that is, we understood that he told him that he was to be the heir to the throne. But as soon as King Edward died, Harold immediately rushed to Westminster Abbey and had himself crowned as King of England. So William of Normandy was outraged, of course, and that is why he immediately gathered his army on the beaches of Normandy, cut down the forest, built the fleet of ships, sailed across, and immediately marched or charged on horseback up to Hastings, where the determining battle took place. And Harold not only lost his army of Saxons, not only lost the battle, but Harold himself died. A lucky arrow shot by one of the Normans struck Harold in the eyeball, and so he was killed with an arrow in his eye. In any case, having defeated this intruder to the throne, William the Conqueror immediately became the new King of England, and his successors have gone on for 900 years since then, 850 years. Okay, Dottie, thank you so much. You must have felt like one of the aristocratic ladies of the court who undertook that unbelievable task of, and it was nice to hear the details of how you did each stitch, the double stitching. Fascinating. Thank you so much. Again, if anybody else, we're going to hear from another Alexander probably next week. Anybody else has any connections with anything in the class, be sure to let us know. Okay. So we haven't quite finished the story of the English language. And William Conqueror, of course, is so important because he brought a new language, which blended into the Germanic Saxon language. And of course, after 200 years or so, all three languages, as you know, blended into a single extraordinary language of English, with the biggest vocabulary of any language in the world. But there's so many fascinating little sidelines. I'm just gonna, when I was reading Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. By the way, Sir Walter Scott of Scotland was he wrote all of his novels about Scottish heroes. He was a Scottish nationalist. He would love to have been here for the vote on seceding from England. Anyway, just as a sideline, in the novel Ivanhoe, person asks, here's a riddle. What's the answer to the riddle? What is Saxon when it's alive and French when it's dead? There's actually not one answer, but there are at least 5 answers I can think of, and here it is. The Saxon, the word deer is a Saxon word. Venison is a French word, French Latin word. When it's alive, it's Saxon, it's a deer. When it's dead, it's venison, to be eaten. That's the French word. And we go down the line. A cow is the Saxon word. Beef is a French Latin word. So the riddle again, what is Saxon when it's alive and French when it's dead? A calf, the Saxon calf, becomes veal when it's dead. Sheep is a Saxon word, and when it's dead, it is French mutton, mouton. And a pig, 3-letter pig, is a Saxon word, short, and pork is the French Latin word. Just an interesting sideline to show some of the nuggets that are fascinating, and because we have 3 different languages to choose from when we express ourselves. So by the time of Geoffrey Chaucer, he was born in 1340, the 3 languages, and by the way, England was trilingual for those couple of centuries. Virtually all of the nobility, the aristocracy, anybody related to the royalty, and many commoners could speak all 3 languages. And of course, by Chaucer's time, they had blended into this one extraordinary language with the biggest vocabulary of any language. And Chaucer, of course, is the best spokesman for that new language. His epic story, the Canterbury Tales, is just rich in all 3 languages. That is part of the new language, English. The prologue of the Canterbury Tales, I'm going to ask Diana to say that just the first few lines. The prologue is 40 lines long, but just to hear it, for those of you who haven't heard Middle English, Chaucerian English, that's quite different. It sounds like a foreign tongue. But anyway, Diana's going to recite the first few lines. Want to say anything about the prologue?
No, this is what I learned from my sister, who would wander around the house chanting this years and years and years ago. One that of Prela with a sure suited, the drocht of marches person to the rota, and bathed every vein in rich liqueur, of which fair two engendered is the floor. Now Zephyr de Seca with a sweat of breath that hath an every holden head, etc.
Thank you, Diana.
Yeah, thank you for the clapping.
Yes. We can see but not hear the clapping. Yeah, that was the first lines of the prologue of the Canterbury Tale. By the way, Robin Gleiser is also an expert in Middle English. She recited aloud. When we did this many years ago, the class, she recited some of the prologue. What Diana said was actually very beautiful lines of poetry. Somebody just speaking street English might have said, in April it rains and then the flowers come up. That is a very prosaic way of saying it. Chaucer says it in a beautiful way that you just heard Diana speaking. One of the great poems in the English language. Because the language, our language, is a blend of all three different languages, you can read the history of a people in almost every sentence. Many of us love the etymology. We have to know the origin of the words we use, have to know the root meaning. That, of course, is called etymology, the study of the origins of meanings. And I have to have a dictionary with the etymologies. I've made a very short list of words in our language. The words, 2 columns, words that are derived from the Saxon, the Germanic tongue, and then a second column, our English words that derive from the French, Latin. And this, of course, on your, I got 4 of these on your outline for today. So what the Saxon word is to walk. Well, first of all, okay, to walk, the French Latin would be to ambulate. Virtually all these words, let's look at the second one. The Saxon, derived from the Saxon, is the verb to burn, from the French to incinerate. Now you're seeing the difference in style of the Germanic words as opposed to the French Latin. Here's a generalization. The Germanic words are short verbs. Germanic verbs are usually short, blunt, to the point, monosyllabic, that is 1 syllable, sometimes harsh sounding, harsh and blunt sounding. Okay, the French Latin words, very different, as you've seen. They're longer words, they're multisyllabic or polysyllabic. In fact, you notice every one of the Germanic words were 1 syllable. Every one of the French Latin words are multisyllabic, that is usually 3 syllables. So the French words are almost always longer, multisyllabic, softer sounding, not as harsh and blunt, softer sounding, more elegant sounding, more polite. And the French, the Normans and the French have always considered their language more polite than the harsh Germanic blunt words. In fact, our English word polite comes from a Latin word politus, which means polished. And that's exactly the way many of the French Latin words sound. Okay, a couple more parallels. The Saxon verb to kill, and what's its counterpart in French, Latin? To execute. To kill and to execute. Another one example, to jail, the Saxon word to jail, the French to incarcerate. So you see the stark difference between the two types of English words. To drift toward the biological, the French Latin word to flatulate is the equivalent to the Saxon word. It's a 4-letter F word, although not the F word, which I will not say. And finally, the French Latin word to defecate, what's the equivalent in Germanic? It's a 4-letter word beginning with the letter S, which I'm not going to pronounce. In any case, with this contrast, you can see a huge variety of words. Those of us who speak English, have a choice of a rich variety. Blunt Saxon words, which get to the point, and the more elegant and softer sounding French Latin words. So I just made up a sentence. This sentence I'm going to speak now, every single word is from the Saxon, the Germanic roots. So here's the sentence. When we talk, words come out of our mouths, speaking the Anglo-Saxon tongue. Every single word there is derived from the Germanic Saxon. This next sentence that I made up, all the major words are from the French Latin roots. Etymology of the diction we express, communicate, emerges from an oral aperture, is derived from the Mediterranean Latin language. All the major words there, except for the of and those, are from the French Latin. Okay, the conclusion from this is that we who speak English have a rich variety of vocabulary to choose from. The richest variety of vocabulary terms in any language in the world. To summarize the story of the English language, it's a remarkable story. To summarize, those of us who speak English, of course, have the largest vocabulary to choose from of any language. And because our 3 different languages have blended in to a single complicated, complex tongue, we have the capacity to express many different shades of meaning, different nuances of meaning. There are other languages in the world, subtle languages, but none that has the variety that we English speakers have. We English speakers can read the history of our language in every sentence that we utter. We can read the history of a people in every single sentence that comes out of our mouths. And I'm one of those. Many of us have to know, don't just like to know the etymology, the root meanings of our words, but I have to have a dictionary And I think it's accurate to say that every word I speak, I know where it came from. I know the etymological roots, whether it's Saxon, French, Latin, or very few minor words like moccasin and teepee. We know what language that comes from. Anyway, here's my personal, one of my personal takeaways from the story of English is this. Life can be a little richer if you know what's coming out of your mouth. Life can be a little richer if you know what's coming out of your mouth. And finally, our language is in part a gift from the early German peoples, the early Germanic peoples. Okay, so that is a brief version of the story of the English language. Very fascinating story. Okay, now we're going on to the next topic. We're going to take a look at the story of the Huns, H-U-N-S. I've only just barely mentioned the Huns earlier. One of the last really is the newcomer among the barbaric or the barbarian invasions. They qualify as true barbarians. And the Huns, we have a picture of the map of Europe, the time of the Huns. There. This is Europe around 400, finishes about 451, 453. But you see this, the Eastern Europe and Northeastern Europe, that large area was occupied, attacked, invaded, and occupied by the Huns. So the question, who in the world were the Huns? Where did they come from? And the Huns were not Germans. The Huns were not Germans. They were actually a nomadic tribe from Central Asia. They were akin to the Mongols. They were from the Euro-Altaic language group and ethnic group. So they were closer to the later Mongols than any other. And they were probably remembered as the most ferocious of all of the barbarian invaders. So here they occupy a whole quarter of Europe, and that they didn't stop there. Look at all the white arrows. By the time Attila, it was about 80 years before Attila, rather correct pronunciation, Attila the Hun led his armies all the way across Europe, all the way across the Germanies, all the way across present-day northern France, down to Paris area, and just with very savage, fierce warriors. They did a lot of destruction to the German peoples, the Germanic peoples. And finally, there was a conclusive battle. A lot of the Germanic tribes organized together, which something they almost never did. It took an emergency like this. So there were a lot of Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, Burgundians, who assembled a huge army, and right about 120 miles south of Paris, Attila led his army, and it was an enormous battle, huge numbers. They fought for about 4 days, and finally, who won the battle? Neither side. It was a stalemate. It was a draw. They were so evenly matched. Neither the Germanic peoples nor the Huns won. Neither nation lost. So at this point, Attila had to decide. He made I think, a wise decision. He said to continue to expand his empire to include all of Western Europe, which he might have. He said that the cost would be too high. So he staged a very studied retreat back across the Rhine River. Across the Rhine River, you see the little white arrow, and back. And then we don't really know what happened next. So for my part, for years, I have been asking myself, well, first of all, who were the Huns? Where did they come from? We know that. Where did the Huns settle? Whatever happened to the Huns? Did they merge into the Germans? Well, nobody knew the final story of the Huns for 1600 years until now. Extraordinary discoveries. There was a project started by German archaeologists. They began 6 years ago. German anthropologists, together with the National Geographic Society. The National Geographic Society in Washington, D.C. Bankrolled much of the project. So the project was to excavate ancient grave sites. And of course, they utilized, I missed this one. This is Attila the Hun leading his Huns into battle. I like the headgear. That's the skin of an entire wolf that he's wearing. Yeah, thanks for close up. So this is Attila. So our question is, whatever happened to Attila's nation group of Huns? Okay, so the German archaeologists, anthropologists, National Geographic Society started excavating graves. This is another picture. It shows where the Germanic tribes were. And here was the importance. The main importance of the Huns was this, that they attacked down, they pushed the Germanic tribes who had been occupying the area for centuries and across the Danube River, and forced the Germanic tribes down into the Roman Empire. And so that was part of the reason for the so-called barbarian invasions or the Germanic migrations. So this is a map of Germany today. And the words are not all clear, but we're taking a look at Bavaria in the south. So the study of the ancient graves began, and the most interesting results were right not too far from Munich in Bavaria. And that's farther south. It's way down into here. It's really in the foothills of the Alps. So 6 burial sites of importance were discovered and excavated. And by the way, the final results were publicized in the year 2018. 2018, that's only 4 years ago, in the National Geographic magazine. So we learned that things we did not know for 1600 years, we've just found out within the last 5 years. Among other things, scientists were able to use DNA testing, and the DNA has become very effective. Every year it becomes a little more fine-tuned and accurate, and other scientific tools were used. And a very startling discovery, the archaeologists, anthropologists found that in the six graves they uncovered, there were skeletons, skulls of young women about the matrimonial age, and they're called the Hun Brides. Okay, now these are skulls of the young women, and the anthropologists rather call them the Hun Brides. The one on the left is the best example. The skulls were narrow and long. And so it's been established that the young women among the Huns, especially the aristocracy, their heads were bound from the time they were infants. Their heads were bound so that their skulls grew narrow, very narrow. The one on the left is the best example. Their skulls were very narrow and very long, so that the person would have appeared taller, would have been in fact taller. One on the right is a normal skull, and you can see the contrast with the one on the far left. Of course, the question, why on earth did the Huns bind their young girls' heads from the time of infancy? Well, anthropologists have determined that it was a sign of beauty to have a narrow skull and a tall skull. Characteristics of beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But also it was a feature of social identity. You would identify with your tribe or your nation clearly if you had a very narrow, tall skull. We also found other graves around the area of Eastern Europe, but this was, to me, the most interesting. And this picture is taken from National Geographic magazine of 2018, for 4 years ago. And a lot of other interesting, if you happen to have National Geographic lying around, it's a very interesting article on this, scouting the origin of the Huns. And in case any of you have a granddaughter or a young person, here's an opportunity to, if the parents would like to have a taller young girl, here's an opportunity to put this into practice. I'm not encouraging it. Okay, and finally, we know there were other archaeology investigations around the area. And so we know that there were other Hunnish graves discovered scattered farther to the south and to the east in Hungary. Oh, do we have a map? I don't think we do.
Okay.
All the multicolored
Mm-hmm.
there. Oh, okay, good. On this map, you can see, of course, white arrow, put the white arrow on southern Germany, right where Munich is. That's the far south borders, farther south, right bordering on Austria. So that's where these 6 graves of the Huns were discovered and studied. But there were also Hunnish graves discovered in Hungary, over here farther east, Slovakia to the north. This is a recent map because Czechoslovakia split into 2 just a decade or two, a couple of decades ago. And then also down in Slovenia. This is this pink country right here. Also, even as far as Russia. So, and I've learned that the we have learned that the custom of binding
Mhm. What the f-
yeah, let's go to the foot.
Pardon me, I'll get the previews, reviews.
Before we finish with the binding of the skulls, this is the bound foot. You know, everybody knows about the Chinese. Chinese women, particularly the higher ranking social women, their feet were bound. Now, this started in China. I'm going to read this underneath the picture in case it's small on your screen. A bound foot. This diagram shows the twisted and cramped bone structure of a bound, Chinese call them a lily, a bound foot, as compared with that of a normal foot, bound tightly with cloth from the age of 5. A little girl's foot grew painfully into this deformed but erotically admired shape. Well, I guess that's erotically attractive. And it could be in the eye of the beholder. But, and of course, the Chinese have done this for centuries. The first known cases of the Chinese binding women's feet, girls' feet, was at the in the Tang Dynasty. Tang Dynasty, which started the year 608. So the beginning of the 7th century, the Tang started binding the feet of their women. Now, why did they do it? Well, the Chinese women have always had an inferior status, China, and it became even more inferior when large Chinese cities were like Chang'an, today called Xi'an, but the capital of the Tang Dynasty was Chang'an, right in the center, interior China. And more people, became a huge city. Trade and commerce flourished as it had not since the Han Dynasty, 500, 600 years earlier. So more and more people were living in large cities in which the women were not needed as much because they weren't needed to do farm work. If the families with girls moved into the big city, their function as laborers on the farm was not nearly as required. So that's one reason it made it. So the status of women, starting in the 600s and the 700s, became even more demeaning. How long did that last? It went on right to the end of the Qing dynasty, the Manchu dynasty, which ended in the year 1911. There were still women with their bound feet. They couldn't really even walk. They had to be carried. And it's pretty incredible that women had bound. We don't know how many. It wasn't everybody. It wasn't the peasant classes, but the elite classes. From about the year 600 until 1911. That's from some of our viewpoint, pretty horrifying.
So the Huns had it too.
And therefore, that's just one example, skulls. One example of other people who have bound their young. The Huns decided to bind the heads of girls, but there are other examples. I could have put in a picture of Lewis and Clark. When Lewis and Clark expedition got down to the Columbia Gorge, Lewis did a drawing, and you may have seen this. I think it was the Nez Perce, but several tribes, including those in the Columbia Gorge. This was in the year 1805. Lewis and Clark were the first people through that part of the world. And the native's head was, as a child, was put in a sandwich board, 2 boards hinged at the top, one in the back of the head and one from right from the tip of his nose, from the bridge above your nose up to the crown of your head was flat as a billiard table. And apparently that's what the natives, the Chinook tribes, thought was a sign of beauty. Other examples. Okay. So that finishing up, now we know a whole lot about the Huns that we did not know 5 years ago. Quite extraordinary. And that where did the Huns finally settle down? Well, we know they settled down in southern Germany and Bavaria, also Hungary, Slovakia, Slovenia. Okay, so thus ends the story of the Huns, the story of the English language and of the Huns. Okay, now, if you have any questions or observations, here's a chance. Oh, it's Julianne. Okay.
You can read it out loud.
Why don't you read them?
Okay, Julianne Seaman says the Saxons were peasants who cared for the animals and the fields. So the Saxon words reflect that husbandry.
Mhm.
The French names were the names of the animals in the court on the table, for example. For example, cow, filet mignon.
Filet mignon. Right.
That's great.
Thank you, Julianne. That's a good example of the two different cultures that lived not side by side, but top to bottom. The Saxon were the workers, the peasants, the governing class, the French, Latin. Yeah, very good. Anybody else have a,
If anyone wants to mute themselves,
oh yeah, unmute.
unmute, that's right. And ask a question. That's a good way to do it too. Here comes John.
Look out. Watch out,
Yeah.
here he comes. About the Bayreuth tapestry,
Yes,
I had a couple of questions about it, actually. I don't know if you can find it again, but can we look at it again?
which one? There are 5,
Dottie's work, yeah.
Okay.
Dottie's 2.
By the way, Dottie, that's just incredible you did that.
Um,
Okay,
Yeah.
this is one of them. Is this the
Yeah,
one?
the
you're
next
thinking of?
one. The next one. Yeah, the next one.
okay.
Okay, this is King Edward before he died.
This one, yes. First of all, I was wondering about this tapestry. This is, of course, done by the winners.
The winners, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, this is the story
Yeah.
of, this is the story from the viewpoint of the winners. The victors usually write the history.
Right, exactly. So one wonders what the tapestry looks like on the backside, you know? But
Right.
two things in this piece. On the far left is a man who appears to be what we know as a hunchback.
Mhm, mhm.
I wonder if he is a known person. And the
I-
other thing is on the far right, it looks like the hand of God coming from heaven.
You
Oh,
betcha.
yes, good eye.
That's right.
Yeah,
So
Dottie,
those two
you can
things,
answer.
this hand and the hunchback really caught my attention. I wonder
Yeah,
why
have
they're
an
there,
idea.
what they, yeah.
I have an idea about the hunchback, but first, Dottie, do you want to comment on the far right, the hand?
My understanding is it's really not a hunchback, it's Harold. He's coming back to see
Oh.
King Edward. And I, it's possible he's a hunchback. I just think it's kind of the angle that his coat is.
Mhm.
I see.
That's my understanding. And yes, that is the hand of God, which is coming down to, bless the cathedral, the abbey. So it is the hand of God, yes.
To bless
and
the
another-
abbey. I see. Interesting.
Yeah, another interesting thing that isn't on here, but one of the small pieces that my son gave me, as you go through it, Halley's Comet appears.
Oh,
And it was there in I can't remember the date now, but it was seen all over Europe, and it shows up in the tapestry, and the comet was thought to bode something terrible happening.
Wow. Gee.
That's right. I thought of putting in that picture, but up in the sky was Halley's Comet of, so we could tell virtually the day of the assembly
Yeah.
of the army.
Yeah.
Um,
Fascinating. Thank you very much, Dottie.
Yeah. Oh, and another footnote on the hand of God over in the far right, that became a common artistic icon of God. And jump up 500 years later, Michelangelo's painting of the creation of man in the Sistine Chapel up in the ceiling.
mhm.
You remember the finger of God touching out and touching the hand of Adam and springing him to
Right.
life. The
Right.
same feature, a hand of God coming out of heaven. And the herald. Oh, and finally the herald. Oh, hey,
Hey,
we've got the whole body of the herald. Anyway, the herald is, as Dottie identified him, it coming and bringing back a message to King Edward that his diplomat Harold, whom we know was a traitor and had himself crowned in Westminster Abbey. That's what really sparked the invasion. So that's what's happening in this scene. Hey, anybody else have some thoughts?
I'm gonna stop the recording.
Okay, yeah.
You have
Dan?
another, you have a question about DNA in the chat.